When I was in high school, I qualified as what you might call a nerd. Back in those days, it wasn't a compliment the way it sometimes is now. I hear people all the time these days wearing that label like some kind of honor badge. For my friends and myself, it felt more like getting punched in the gut over and over. High school was just a different animal back then. We'd get roughed up for not enjoying the same music or not being into athletics. It sounds like a cliche, but it's the honest truth. Junior year was the absolute worst when it came to the bullying. This one kid, Steve, made our lives miserable all year long. Toward the end of that school year, Steve got it in his head that breaking into the school to pull off some dumb prank would be a great idea, all because he wanted to show off how cool he was. Well, Steve was so cool that he ended up getting himself caught. Before I go any further, I should set a little context first. My school is closed down now, but at the time, it was one of the more well-known private schools in the region. We had to wear uniforms and attend regular church services during school hours. The building was very old, and before it became a school, it had been some kind of hospital for the sick. I recall hearing that when they constructed the school in the 1950s and dug up part of the ground, they unearthed a bunch of skeletal remains from people who had died of tuberculosis, among other illnesses. Because people were afraid of getting sick, they just dumped the bodies in this underground tunnel that used to connect the hospital to another building. These stories, true or not, became the stuff of local legend around my hometown, especially for students at the school. In other words, they got passed down almost like urban myths. The school being as old as it was, and looking at two, I might add, made it an objectively spooky place from time to time. Rumors started floating around that the school was haunted, like restless souls, and all that fun stuff. You'd constantly hear strange, unexplainable noises all the time. And the typical school spirit response was always, "Yep, those noises must be the ghosts." However, the more logical explanation was that the building was just old and falling apart, so it made a lot of noise on its own. Sorry for that detour. Back to Steve. The reason Steve wanted to break in was so he could pull off this elaborate prank. He successfully got inside, started trashing classrooms, tossing papers everywhere, and even went to the library to pull stacks of books off the shelves. You're probably wondering how Steve ended up getting caught. Well, to finish off his ghost-themed prank, he went to the art room, swiped some red paint, and started scrawling messages across the lockers. Classic horror movie stuff. He wrote things like, "Get out. Your soul is next." And my personal favorite, "Death is coming." While he was painting on those lockers, Steve claimed he heard something coming from the basement. According to Steve, he went to the basement door, and before heading down, he spotted shadows shifting and heard voices talking from the darkness below. He said it sounded evil, not like normal whispering. It scared him so badly that he bolted. It didn't take long for them to match his handwriting to the red paint on the lockers. My school had had enough of Steve's nonsense, and they expelled him that week after the investigation. I'll never forget Steve screaming as he left the office, yelling about something evil in the basement. His words, not mine. I was convinced Steve was making it all up, trying anything to save his own skin. Everyone was so broken up about Steve, except for my few friends and me, who couldn't stand the kid. In our view, he got exactly what he deserved. For the last few weeks of school, we had to listen to everyone go on about how brave he was and how he could have died. Yeah, I'm not joking. These fools actually believed Steve was in danger from evil spirits. As the school year was winding down, I came up with a crazy idea to suggest to my friends. On the very last day of school, we should break in and do what Steve couldn't. We could prove there were no evil spirits, no ghosts, and most importantly, that Steve was a lying punk. My friends were on board. The plan was simple: break in quietly, make our way to the basement, confirm it's just a basement, and then leave. If we heard anything, we'd run. We wouldn't get caught like Steve did. We figured if we ran and didn't get caught, no one would suspect us because we were the nerds, the teacher's pets, the fools who actually liked learning. We weren't the type of kids to pull something like this, especially right after someone else got busted. I remember that night vividly. It was chilly for an early summer evening. We all had on sweatpants and jackets. We really leaned into the whole criminal breaking in aesthetic. Hoods up, trying our best to be sneaky. Breaking in wasn't exactly difficult for us. Not because we were master criminals, but because my friend Carson's mom was a janitor at the school and had access to a key. Half the reason we decided to go through with this. Carson swiped the key, and we just walked right in through the back door. I'll admit, it was objectively unsettling in there. Anyone who's been in their school after dark knows that feeling. I don't know if it's something hardwired into us, but there's just something unnerving about being in the school at night. Maybe it was just years of hearing all those ghost stories. I sort of figured I was subconsciously fearing evil ghosts. Urban legends are powerful things. We eventually made it to the basement, and I have to admit, I was feeling something. I don't know about my friends, but I was actually kind of scared. I didn't tell them because I didn't want them to make fun of me. My logic in that moment was that I was already there and I was going through with this. We opened the door and didn't see anything. It was a dark staircase leading down to an even darker basement. Carson took the lead, and we followed. Cell phones weren't exactly widespread yet, and they definitely didn't have flashlights, so we were using straight-up dollar store flashlights. As we made our way downstairs, the basement was creepy, obviously. It was an old building with a dusty basement. There were boxes of stored items everywhere. We peeked through a few as we walked around. Old textbooks, Christmas decorations, extra school uniforms. Probably the creepiest thing about the basement for me was all the old religious statues. I'm weird, but for some reason, old religious statues unnerve me. They just feel unsettling, like old churches freak me out. We kept exploring the basement for a few more minutes. We didn't find any people, but we did discover just how massive the basement was. It felt like it stretched on forever. Our flashlights weren't even strong enough to see the far end of the basement from where we were standing. I know they were cheap flashlights, but still. Eventually, we made our way to one of the corners. It felt colder there for some reason. We moved some boxes and couldn't believe what we saw. There was a small hole in the wall. I'd say probably the size of a large beach ball. It was small, but big enough to crawl through. Carson wanted to check it out, but we were against it. Instead, we shone the flashlight through the hole. It was just darkness. It looked like a tunnel. We all had the same thought. This was probably the remains of the tunnel where they'd stored all those bodies back in the day. Carson convinced us we had to at least crawl in a little way and see. If we really wanted to prove there were no ghosts, we needed to check that spot. We played rock, paper, scissors to decide who would go first, and I lost. I started crawling through the dark tunnel, and I heard something. I stopped because I thought I must be hearing things. I could hear my friends laughing because I'd already stopped. I told them to shut up because I heard something and was trying to listen as hard as I could. I could clearly make out something, but I couldn't tell what it was. The only way I can describe it is that it sounded like whooshing. Not like wind, but something else. I shouted down the tunnel, and the whooshing sound slowly seemed to morph into a whisper. I kept asking if anyone was there, and the whispering continued and grew louder. Then it just went quiet. I could hear my friends asking me what the holdup was, but I couldn't answer. I just sat there in the tunnel, using my flashlight to find any explanation. I crawled forward a little bit, and then my flashlight caught something. Squatting in the tunnel, maybe 15 feet away from me, was a person. They looked old and decrepit. I shouted, but didn't move. The person just stared back at me, with vacant eyes and this unsettling half-open mouth. He had no shirt on and was extremely skinny. I could basically see his ribs. I asked if he was okay, and he didn't move. As I tried to crawl backward, the person lunged toward me in that squatting position. He was making this unnaturally weird noise. Trying to crawl backward while staring at this person was the worst experience of my entire life. My friends were confused until I finally cleared the tunnel and they saw this person crawl out after me. As he took a step out of the tunnel, he tried to grab me like some feral human being. We sprinted to the stairs and never looked back. As we reached the top of the stairs and closed the door, we could hear the person in the basement but they stopped chasing us. Once we were upstairs, we ran out of the school and back to my place. We couldn't explain what we saw. Don't get me wrong, I'm sure this wasn't an undead evil spirit, but that doesn't mean I can explain it. The best answer I could come up with was that the tunnel must open out somewhere, maybe a sewer of some kind, and this homeless person or crackhead must live on the streets. Or at least they used to, until they found shelter under the school. That was my logical answer then, and I still stand by it to this day. The one thing I can't get past is the eyes. This person had eyes I'd never seen before, and I haven't seen them since. The school shut down several years ago, and when it did, I thought about that night and wondered if the tunnel was still there. If by some chance this was some sort of ghostly figure, I just hope that tearing down the school helped him find peace. As great as the end of the school year is, there's nothing better than the parties that follow the end of the semester. After high school, all my friends went to colleges scattered across my home state and beyond, myself included. My college was 8 hours from where I grew up and 2 states away. I couldn't wait to get home after finals so I could see my friends again and, more importantly, party it up. We'd already planned this huge party at my friend Logan's house. His parents had this mansion in the middle of nowhere with a pool, a huge backyard with a bonfire, and tons of places to crash. It was an ideal party spot, especially since his parents were going out of town the first weekend. We'd all be home. It was like the stars were aligning for all of us degenerates. Before the party started, I met up with Logan and a few other friends. We went to the mall, grabbed some food, and shared stories about our college experiences so far. A more accurate way to put that is we shared stories about how the party scenes at our colleges were. Before the party, we talked about ways to spice things up. How could we make this party more epic than it was already going to be? Logan suggested making it a costume party. It seemed like a weird idea for the end of May, but since we were away in college for Halloween, this would be our Halloween party. It didn't take much to convince us. We spread the word around and told people to come in costumes if they could on short notice. People loved the idea. I posted something on Instagram about the party so my college friends could see that I was just as much a degenerate at home as I was away. We found candy corn at one of the local grocery stores. And that was the extent of our Halloween setup. We all threw together cheap costumes at the last minute and got ready for people to start showing up. I decided to take an old cheap Jason hockey mask I had lying around in the basement and go as Casey Jones. People started shuffling in around 10 that night with drinks and makeshift costumes. The Purge was new around that time, so most of the girls were wearing Purge-inspired costumes. Before we knew it, the party was out of hand. Just like a lot of parties we'd thrown in the past, way more people showed up than we'd invited. Since Logan's parents weren't home and we didn't really have to worry about neighbors, he didn't care and just kept letting people in. I lost track of how many people were there. And because of the costumes, I had no clue who was even there other than a few of my close friends. A few hours into the party, I was acting a fool on the back deck, telling drunken stories. I looked up at one point and noticed a girl with one of those cool masquerade ball masks on inside the house. It looked like she was staring right at me through the sliding glass door. I waved, and she waved back. She was standing alone, drinking something out of a red cup. I asked the people on the deck if they knew who she was, and nobody had any idea. I went inside to talk to her, but as I got closer, she walked away into the house. By the time I got inside, she was gone. I looked around quickly, but didn't see her. I wasn't sure if she was trying to play some kind of game, but I didn't want to be creepy in case she wasn't, so I went back outside. Some time had passed, and I hadn't seen the girl. Every few minutes, I would scan the area and look for her, but I didn't see her. It was a few hours later before I saw her again. I jumped into the pool with my mask still on. While I was swimming, I looked up and saw her walking toward the back of the yard by herself. Logan didn't have a fence. It was a huge yard with a tree line in the back that emptied into a small forest. She was heading for the trees. I shouted for her a few times, and it seemed like she couldn't hear me. It didn't help that I didn't know her name, so I was just yelling gibberish in her direction. When she got to the trees, she stopped. She looked back at me and waved again. I jumped out of the pool. I looked around me to make sure she was waving at me, and she clearly was. Even though she was a good distance away, I could clearly see the bright gold mask. While I was waving at her, she gestured for me to follow her into the woods. I didn't think twice about it. I sprinted to the tree line. She was far enough away that by the time I got there, she wasn't standing there anymore. To give you an idea of just how far the pool was from the tree line, I could barely hear the loud music from standing next to the trees. While standing at the trees, I started saying things like, "Hello," and "Are you there?" As I said before, I didn't want to creep her out by following her, even though she did gesture for me to do that. I was trying to look into the dark forest, but I couldn't see her. I was looking for the reflection of the moon off the gold mask. After a couple of minutes, I said I was going to head back to the party because I was freezing. After I got out of the pool, I never put a shirt or pants on, so I was standing there shivering with nothing but a cheap plastic hockey mask and a bathing suit. I had gotten so excited to meet this girl, I just ran off without drying off. As I turned around to head back to the party, I heard a voice. She said softly, "Don't go back yet. Come and find me first." That was all I needed to hear. I turned back around and continued looking through the dark trees. I kept telling her I couldn't see her. I heard a branch snap to my left, but then her voice to my right. She said she was just over here. She started acting flirtatiously. She said I looked cold and that she could warm me up. I know that's weak for sure, but it worked on me. I started heading into the forest toward her voice. A few feet in, I saw her gold mask on the ground. I picked it up. It really was a cool mask. I walked a little further into the woods. This little dance we were doing had me so invested I'd forgotten how cold it was in that moment. I finally saw her standing a few feet away from me. It was dark, so I couldn't see her face. She had a white tank top on, black shorts, and her dark hair was down over her face. My smooth line to her was that I found her mask. She laughed and thanked me. She asked if I could bring it over. I started walking toward her, and she didn't move at all. She didn't even extend her arm to grab the mask. As I got closer, I could see that her head was down a little bit and her hair was still obstructing her face. I started to extend my arms to hand her the mask and told her my name is Kip. That's when she said, "I know who you are." I finally recognized the voice, but I couldn't place it. It was familiar, but I just couldn't place it at that moment. I thought it had to be a girl I went to high school with. When I was only inches away, she finally lifted her head up. That's when I recognized her. It was a friend of a girl I dated briefly in college. Remember, my college was 8 hours away. What the hell was she doing here? She took a step back, and from my left, I heard the sound of branches snapping again. I looked, and before I could react, my ex was heading toward me fast, holding a metal baseball bat. She took a swing right at my head. I dove to the ground, and somehow she missed me. I heard her scream, and then she took another overhead swing with the bat and missed again. I got up and ran. That's all I could do. I just kept running all the way back to the party, screaming that someone was in the woods. That put a damper on the party immediately. I was cold and shaking with adrenaline. Logan kicked everyone out except for a handful of people who were staying there that night, but he refused to call the police. He didn't want to get in trouble for having the party. I clearly couldn't drive, but I was terrified all night. I made sure Logan checked every lock in the house. I watched out the back windows the entire night, but never saw anything I could confirm was them. The tree line was so far away that I couldn't even tell if they were standing back there. As soon as the sun started to rise, I got in my car and left. I couldn't believe this girl traveled 8 hours to attack me, maybe even worse. I didn't realize I'd had such an effect on that girl. We only dated for a few weeks, and I ended things because she seemed a little unhinged. She constantly wanted to see my phone and my emails, which I hated, but I never refused. I'd go back to my dorm after class, and she'd already be in my room asking why I was 2 minutes late. It was just too much, especially for something that was only a few weeks in. Well, my harmless breakup must not have been that harmless after all. I spent the rest of that summer constantly looking over my shoulder. Every time I saw a girl who even remotely resembled her, I got in my car and left. I can say that she helped me mature, even if it was unintentional. I stopped drinking and even partying hard after that night. She didn't go back to that college after that summer, and I never saw her again. For a while, I tracked her on social media, but eventually she got rid of that. Be careful what you say to people. Sometimes what you say may seem harmless to you, but it can have profoundly different effects on other people. I can't imagine the thought process of driving that far and planning to cause harm like that. If she had made contact with the bat, I don't think I'd be sitting here writing this story today. Last year, I got my first real extended job as a substitute teacher. I'd subbed all over the area for a while, but in April of last year, one of the teachers in a school I subbed at often went out on maternity leave. From April until the end of the school year in late June, I served as one of the history teachers. Honestly, my few months there were great. Being a substitute teacher can sometimes be a nightmare depending on the school and age group you're with. Specifically for this job, I was teaching seniors in high school. By the time April hits, a lot of the seniors are already feeling the effects of senioritis. In other words, they're checked out. For my few months there as the teacher, I kept lessons brief and fun. At that point in the curriculum, the students were learning about government. Instead of just drowning the students in lectures and notes, I focused more on healthy debates and how to communicate with people who may not agree with your political ideas. It may seem controversial, but it ended up being rewarding. Before I knew it, finals were over and summer vacation was about to begin. The last day of school was always a half day with an award ceremony. After the ceremony, the students began to slowly leave for the summer. Many of the seniors were doing their final goodbyes. During that time, I went back to my classroom and started cleaning up. I wanted to make sure everything was put away and perfect for when the original teacher came back in the fall. When I was almost done, the principal saw that I was still there. He asked me to walk with him so we could talk about my future. We talked for almost an hour. He was impressed with my teaching style and said he was going to try to find a way to hire me in the fall. This made me so excited. We started leaving at the same time, and before I got outside, I realized I'd forgotten my purse in the classroom. I said goodbye to the principal and made my way to the classroom. The school was almost empty by that time. I think maybe a handful of teachers were still there. When I got back to the classroom, I was startled. Standing next to my desk was one of my students, a brilliant but quiet kid that I'll call Ben. I asked what he was doing, and he just looked at me and shrugged. He didn't say anything. Then I asked him if he was okay, and very quietly, he said he was fine and just doing some thinking. I told him that he couldn't be in there, and unfortunately, he needed to leave. I was uncomfortable with this situation because I didn't know the protocol for something like this. I didn't want to just leave the kid alone in the school. While I was trying to process the situation and think about what to say next, Ben slowly started heading for the door. I was relieved that he was finally leaving. When he got to the door, he stopped. He didn't look back at me. He just continued looking forward and then said, "Thank you. I'm sure I'll see you around." That may seem harmless, but I wish you could hear how he said it. It just felt so weird. Everything about this entire interaction made me feel uneasy. Once he walked away, I went to grab my purse so I could finally leave. I usually leave my purse in one of the desk drawers, but my purse was on the chair next to the desk. Instantly, I assumed Ben tried to steal something from my purse. Why else would it be on the chair? I checked the inside of the purse frantically, but everything appeared to be there. Even all the cash in my wallet was still there. I figured that Ben tried to steal from me, and his conscience must have gotten the better of him. A few nights later, my husband and I were enjoying the beautiful summer night with a fire in the backyard. Our 7-year-old son was staying the weekend at his cousin's house, so we were enjoying our alone time. While we were outside, we heard a strange rustling sound coming from behind the shed. I kept telling my husband that it was probably a rodent and to just leave it alone for right now. Around midnight, we decided to head inside for the night. Just before going in, my husband said he was going to check out the shed. I told him not to get sprayed by a skunk, and then I went inside. I started getting ready for bed and realized my husband was still not inside. When I got back downstairs, he was just coming back inside from the backyard. He said when he initially looked behind the shed, he didn't see anything. When he walked around to the front of the shed, he noticed that the door was slightly opened. He looked inside and saw what looked like muddy footprints, but he wasn't 100% sure. That's when he went back behind the shed to investigate further. He said it looked like the muddy ground back there was stepped in, but again, he couldn't be sure. He thought maybe his anxiety about the situation was causing him to see patterns that weren't there. I wasn't as concerned as he was. It's incredibly likely that he just left the shed door open. The next morning, I woke up before him. I went downstairs to make my coffee, and I noticed that the back door was ajar. Like it was mostly shut, but not all the way. I assumed that after all the commotion with the shed the previous night, he must have forgotten to shut the door. I shut and locked the door and went about my day. That night, he stayed up late to watch a baseball game, and I fell asleep on the couch waiting for him. After the game, he woke me up, and we went upstairs to bed. Once I was in bed, I couldn't sleep for some reason. I kept moving around, trying to get comfortable. Something just didn't feel right. Since I couldn't sleep, I decided to get out of bed and go read some of my book in the living room. I quietly snuck out of the room so I didn't wake up my husband. When I started walking down the hallway, I froze in a panic. Standing at the end of the hallway was the outline of a dark figure. I slowly reached for the light. When I turned it on, standing at the end of the hallway outside of my son's bedroom was Ben from the classroom. I didn't know what to do or what to say. Ben smiled and said, "Hey, Miss Jones. Nice house." Then he walked into my son's bedroom and shut the door. He was holding something in his hand, but I couldn't tell what it was from where I was standing. I ran back into my bedroom and called 911. I woke up my husband, and immediately he ran to our son's room. As he entered the room, Ben was trying to climb out the window. He tried to grab him, but he ended up jumping from the two-story window to the ground. He landed on his feet and continued running. My husband stayed with me and waited for the police. I told the officer who he was. They went to Ben's house and spoke with his parents, who told them that Ben had been there all night. When the officer spoke to Ben, he told them that he'd been sleeping for hours, so it couldn't have been him. The police basically told me that there was nothing they could do. It seemed crazy to me. This kid was literally in my house. They said if something happens again, call them, but until then, they weren't able to do anything. I barely went outside for the rest of the summer. I changed all our locks just in case and invested in cameras all around the house. My husband told me that he probably got our home address from my ID, which was in my purse. That would explain why my purse wasn't in the drawer. What still makes me sick is that he was entering my son's room. I can't even imagine what he was doing in there. What if my son had been home? My son spent a lot of time with his cousin last summer because I was terrified to have him sleep at home. When he's older, I'll tell him why. As of writing this story, I have no idea where Ben is. Thankfully, there's never been another incident. I don't get it, though. He was always a nice kid in class, and he always respected the other students and me. That night when I saw him in the hallway was the first time I got to witness in real time what mother's intuition is. If I had stayed in bed 10 seconds longer, I would have never seen Ben in the hallway. We currently have our house on the market and hope to move very soon. When I'm out of that house, I'll finally be able to get a good night's sleep.